I know. That's what I was saying. Virtual meetings ज़्यादा हो रही है, हाँ?
True, but thankfully we do meet like that, no?
Yeah, I know.
Otherwise. So where are you? In Rome?
Yeah, I'm in Rome. Yes.
Oh,
Even though
great,
it's
great.
early morning here,
Ah,
7:30.
must be. Yes. Good to see you.
How's everyone at home?
Yeah, all fine, thankfully. And you? And yours?
That's all well, yeah, all well.
Acha. So do you visit or is it still restricted for you because of the
Well,
quarantine requirement or something?
अभी restrictions ऐसा है कि like you can go there. Coming back में थोड़ा यहाँ पर ज़्यादा
जी,
checking है.
वही, that's what I'm saying.
So that's the problem.
True. Oh, that was long back. I think that was almost 20 years ago.
That was 20 years ago, and I was with
Ah,
you. We were
yes,
seeing
of
that
course.
fort of Churu. We were looking
Yes.
at that wall.
True. Yes.
So in that visit, I was
So
with
you
you.
are still with the archaeology?
Yes, I am still with archaeology, but presently I am posted as superintending archaeologist at Amir Fort.
Oh, yes. Oh,
So
in visits of your site, did you try to do something like those activities for tourists or
we tried, we
which
tried,
activity?
we
Uh,
tried, but actually the response is not good.
Sir,
morning.
we start at 11.
Okay.
Santosh sir is joining in a minute.
Your number is same, kya, Pankaj ji? I have
My number is same, sir.
941425.
9414251730.
Okay, it's the same.
It is the
Okay.
same. It is the WhatsApp number also.
Yeah, I have it.
Pieces of their impact and the development of efficient DRM strategies. The framework needs to be developed soon to include more types of constructions as well as to define similar guidelines for other types of hazards. The training of emergency response officials to ensure adequate behavior during an event
enriches the whole kind of initiative of this particular program. So I will take this opportunity to welcome you also and this particular webinar. And I said this in terms of our old partner that again I will get back to him later when I will introduce him. But Mr. Pankaj Dharendra, the superintendent of the Archaeological and Museum Government of Rajasthan. The moment we say that the city of palaces, then we say that our mind goes back to Rajasthan. And no better person than Mr. Pankaj, who is looking after this whole of archaeological and museum things in Rajasthan. So how that disaster could be seen in the archaeology, how it could be seen in the museum, whether the kind of a movable and immovable structure. Immovable structure of museum is much more expensive than the movable I can think of. So how that could be into protection of when it comes to disaster risk management. And his experience is also very big in terms of UNESCO and also that state government initiatives and also some international engagement. So I welcome you also, Sri Pankaj, for being with us.
Thank you, sir.
And I told
Thank
you
you
about Mr. Jigyasu. Thank you very much. And Mr. Jigyasu has been a very old friend of ours and who engages himself in protection of cultural heritage and project manager in the Urban and Climate Initiative. He also worked for UNESCO and for long years, and also he was engagement with the this cultural heritage at Retosamkan University, Kyoto, Japan, if I remember correctly. That is our old memories, and been vice president since 2017 to 2020 in ECOMOS. So this is very interesting to understand, and I'm very excited to hear all of you. I would flag a couple of issues in terms of when we talk about disaster management and cultural heritage. So one very important thing which I'm looking after this when I'm talking about this, when it happened in Gujarat and many instances, especially after Gujarat also, I try to understand and appreciate these challenges. When the earthquake happened and we had this into our engagement in terms of recovery and reconstruction. That time I was working with the World Bank and I was the project manager for that on the recovery and reconstruction. That our learning started. But when happened in, this was a mind-boggling thing which happened in Nepal. When the whole of Darbar, that area, the city, heritage city, you can say that the people were living with that and it gone forever. So one heritage site which collapsed and large number of people died in that. The Minar, you can say. And the other is this Bhakpur, and that area is also is a kind of a challenging scenario. So, and India is a very, very old civilization. If you talk about North India, you talk about Southern India, you talk about Eastern India, you talk about Western India. So wherever you go, old civilization and created old infrastructure. Whether you talk about Puri in the east and whether you talk about the southern states, and lot many temples and mosques there in the country. Similarly, in the Jammu and Kashmir and western side. So our country is full of those cultural heritage. Is a kind of living teachers for civilizations. So we say that they are the gurus, and if we wish to understand that how our forefather used to live, and if you have a kind of a dialogue with the museum, dialogue with the infrastructure, dialogue with the old heritage, then one find that it has enriched like anything, your experience and everything. They do also talk, and one only thing we have to establish communication with those structures. So I will not say much. I'm really eager to listen to all the three stalwarts who looks after different cultural heritage, but I'm sure they will guide us in taking some of the suggestions which they all have been suggesting, and which still India to take on that, where we can push in. So I'm grateful to all of you, and I'm also welcoming and take this opportunity to welcome all the participants who have joined so far in this deliberation. On behalf of Major General Bindal, and on behalf of my team, of the National Institute of Disaster Management, Mr. Vivek and me, I welcome you all the dignitaries, and I over to Vivek for further coordination of the workshop. Vivek, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for setting up the way forward for the session. Now, let us start the technical session. I would like to request respected Shri Divya Gupta sir, Principal Director, Architectural Heritage Division, INTEC, for a discussion on topic address data collection on cultural heritage losses to support in-depth analysis of their impact and the development of efficient DRM strategies. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Santosh sir, for these very kind words, and Vivek for coordinating. Can you allow me to share my content? Thank you. And institutions to look after, but the other parts, which are basically several historic buildings, sites, traditional settlements or areas, even cultural landscape, or our vernacular traditions, some of the other heritage objects and features that are spread in several of our cities, or interlinked heritage of natural heritage like water bodies. Those are the ones that are not looked after or not really known. And again, to give you a national scenario, we recently published a book called The State of Our World Built Heritage, a case for the unprotected, where we find that close to only about 10,000 sites or heritage buildings are really under some sort of protection in the country, whereas INTAC has listed close to about 70,000 till date. And yet, I think we are still at the tip of an iceberg, because they're close to about maybe a 10 lakh or 11 lakh unlisted sites which are still unrecognized. So you can look at the vulnerability of our heritage, where we are talking that merely about 0.01 of our sites are under some sort of protection or recognition. And a large amount of this is also in danger of disappearance, because if we do not know about them, we cannot strategize or have any regulation or protection for them. So I give this example as a heritage iceberg, and where I think we are very well aware of our World Heritage or state designated heritage, or the ones that are protected by the Archaeological Survey of India, or some of the other listed important landmarks. But there's large amount of heritage which is still lies unexplored, unknown. And this is what is really the unprotected, unlisted, which is on the most vulnerable at the highest risk, especially in a disaster situation, because the other tip of the iceberg is still taken care, but not so much of the one that is invisible. Or so I think some of our strategies really need to look at how to make this invisible visible. And this is what I was pointing, that that's why perhaps large amount of our heritage is really unprotected and thus vulnerable and at risk. These are some examples from the Gujarat earthquake that Santosh sir also mentioned, which he had worked on. And even in terms of the scenario of the challenges that also impact otherwise the heritage management, including the disaster risk mitigation, recovery, or management, is that, like I said, that the recognition of heritage is very minuscule. It's not really integrated within the urban planning. So in case when we look at post-disaster mitigation also, several of these areas may not be declared heritage. That's why they could be even wiped off, or newer buildings may come up which may not be in sync with the heritage character. A large amount of cost is related to the aspect of awareness and lack of technical or limited technical expertise in this particular sector, or even institutions. There are very few. And also, I somehow feel that heritage has not really been a priority. It's sort of always looked at a peripheral, extra optional. It somehow needs to be really mainstreamed and integrated within the system. And I mean, this just to show that, like, the cyclical disaster management cycle of pre-disaster, post needs to, at all level, include heritage within this particular disaster management cycle. Within which the proposal is that firstly we need to identify or document these heritage, and this part is largely already taken care by Intact. So the aspect that have already been documented, if they can be really looked at, from that the vulnerability or those heritage at risk can be identified at different scales related to various risks or vulnerability each of these sites of building have, from earthquakes or flood, fire, and other natural or human-induced disasters. And then maybe analyzing the cause and effect and looking at a prioritizing, so that at least those we can do certain reductions as well as mitigation measures. This is for once we are able to identify that heritage at risk, then we can maybe come up with certain mitigation or conservation efforts for them, pre as well as post disaster. For this, I think we have been stressing that several of these sites require to be prepare the disaster management plan. And we had been preparing this, and I think we were among the pioneers who actually took up this particular aspect. In fact, the first time in the Butch earthquake in 2001, where the first time a disaster assessment of cultural heritage sites was actually done in India. And since then, we have done almost all post-disaster assessment and mitigation strategies have been done for be Kashmir or Chennai or Uttarakhand, even Sikkim, Jaisalmer, and more recently, now we have also started to work in Nepal on the Government of India's invitation. There is also a guideline for cultural heritage sites, which the NDMA has produced. Somehow that also needs to be propagated, and more awareness needs to be brought out for these guidelines. And when we are talking of the movable aspects, there is also now a guideline on the museum sites for preparation of the disaster management plan. And the model plan, the first ever one that we recently did for the National Museum, would also serve as an example. I mean, these are just to show that the kind of the trajectory post Gujarat earthquake that we have followed, that almost all the heritage building, all the disasters post 2001 have been documented in terms of the kind of damages these disasters have done uh, for the heritage sector. And thankfully for Gujarat, we had a listing based on which we were able to take up this survey of the 488 protected monuments. But having said that, that list was also not adequate. It was only listed close to about 181. But when we used to go into these sites, we realized there's so much more to survey. Similarly, in 2009, after the Jaisalmer earthquake, we were able to do another survey. Several of these buildings were also then restored through grants. Even in Sikkim, we had looked at this after the earthquake in 2011. Again, we were very fortunate that 2005 we had done a listing, and we really revisited all these sites, the 287 sites, and really looked at what had been the impact of these disasters. Now, in that 287 sites, it was very sad to note that 50% of them had really reduced to rubble, and several of these were also restored back, but not in a heritage sensitive way. So I think that there is also a lesson here, that a listing that was done in 2005, and considering it was an earthquake zone, the risk and the mitigation measures were not in place. And then within like about 6-7 years, the disaster hit, and we lost a lot of heritage properties in Sikkim. So these were just the kind of assessment that had been done, an analysis that had been done, and a lot of interventions and recommendations were also given, which were very specific to the heritage building in Sikkim. Unfortunately, this also, even after that lesson of 2005, the 2011 earthquake also, only very few of these measures were actually implemented on ground. I mean, the same story was also with Srinagar floods in 2014. And we looked at a lot of these heritage buildings. Now, a lot of these heritage buildings that was really impacted were houses and abandoned houses, which people were not living. And so some of them are still in the same position, and they were never restored. And that is another aspect of disaster, that lot of the efforts of conservation needs to be sustainable and feasible as well. And if people are not living there, then the idea of restoration is not very attractive to the policymaker, of course. I mean, I just mentioned that besides these the heritage sites, we've also been engaged in preparing the disaster management plan for the National Museum, where we were able to identify the hazards of mainly the movable objects, but there is also a building. This was unfortunately because of the new proposal of the Central Vista. Now the museum is proposed to be shifted to a new location. So the kind of disaster management plan we looked at from the whole scenario of how the building is used, on what are the public and private zones, and mainly, very importantly, the accessibility, circulation, and fire exit evacuation. Besides the objects there, was also an important aspect of this disaster management plan, and this was really using the guidelines of the NDMA related to that. Now, in that context, I feel that I should emphasize that one of the key for any disaster risk reduction or mitigation is documentation of this heritage. And this is the recurring lesson that we have got from all of this, that if we have a proper documentation in place prior to the disaster, or even prior to even designating them as risks, it helps us a lot. And I mean, there are strategies for documenting this. And I feel that now we have a technology where we can uh, even do some sort of expedite this documentation, even to a certain degree remotely. Or this is an example where we have done a cultural resource mapping using GIS through a crowdsourcing method, where people or local communities are engaged to download a app, and they tell what are the various buildings. Okay, this may not be accurate fully, but still you get some sort of a base data from the site, especially on areas that are either not accessible, especially with the current situation of COVID. The other is, Rohit, I think would maybe share more light, is that the ICROM is also developing certain guiding principles on how to use laser scanning for this. So in case of our important monuments, if we are able to capture them through a laser scan, then their conservation would also be possible if there is damage. Secondly, laser scanning also is now providing us with a very accurate and a very fast way, if especially if they are doing from a drone, a very fast way of capturing heritage data or capturing information from the site, especially also post-disaster, because several of these sites again become inaccessible because of rubble and other issues. So this is another technique that we can really look at. Now, these are all cutting edge and new technologies that somehow do not feature in the old guidelines. So that's why I'm saying that, some of these guidelines also need to address these newer tools and techniques. The other is LiDAR, which is also another cutting edge technology, which can also be used on laser or terrestrial. And this will show, this can show the information after removing the vegetative layer. So it penetrates or strips away the vegetation layer and shows, because many a times when you're doing an aerial survey, the vegetation come in the way that if there are things under the tree cover, you would not really come to know what is the problem or what is below that, including in post-disaster. And I also feel that very importantly, that a lot of information is already existing with various several institutions. It needs to be combined, maybe a heritage archive, which also we are working on, perhaps using GIS, and can also maybe compile all this information so the policymakers or the decision maker have access to these in preparing this DRM and DRR strategies. And also, I feel that several newer technologies are giving us an opportunity to remotely monitor, including AI. So if we sort of pin all our heritage at risk, we can use the artificial intelligence to remotely monitor them. And like I'm just giving an example from a satellite imagery of over 20 years, you can see this particular pond being sort of slowly encroached, while like today this pond does not exist in Delhi. So similar cases could also be related to heritage sites, and these perhaps technologies or these also require a lot of dialogue. I think that is what my point was, that we need to now expand our field and not only talk among the conservationists or people in this, a lot of people from the artificial intelligence, disaster risk management through remote technologies, maybe National Science Center, ISRO. These sort of people may also start to have a dialogue with these people, and how can they help us in DRR. And lastly, I think that as a sum up, I think firstly, we need to have a program related to the identification of heritage risk from disaster. Maybe we can already, there's a platform like Google, which is an equivalent of Google Earth, where we can place all these heritage risk map um, using the existing data. Some of these then, based on this at risk, we start to document using the technologies that I have been talking. And most importantly, we really start to now integrate and interlock heritage within the development plans and the disaster management plans. A lot of it is rightly also focused on infrastructure and other aspects that are of prime importance post-disaster. But the cultural heritage aspect also needs to now be interlocked within these plans. The other is the specific bylaws for heritage areas, especially in the post-disaster response and recovery stage, and may also look at the guidelines for DRR and DRM and the disaster management plans for heritage assets. Perhaps they can need to be now issued from the NDMA, like these other guidelines they had issued. Maybe these can be based on the compilation of the existing information base that I just shared with you and some certain other good practices and challenges. And the existing guidelines, which I think very few people know about, needs to have awareness and capacity building through this integrating heritage aspects within the disaster management plan. With that, I thank you, and we'll look forward for questions and discussions and further debate on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, it was a very wonderful presentation. You have highlighted some points about tangible and intangible, in which arts, crafts, dance, music, built heritage, about the built architectural heritage, about iceberg, heritage management challenges. You said about the protection and recognition of heritage, about urban planning. And sir, you well said about the risk assessment and disaster management plan about National Museum, earthquake damage assessment. About you said documentation in heritage, culture resource mapping on site using GIS-based mobile app, laser scanning, monitoring using AI and remote technologies about Narayana village pond. In last, you said about the guiding principles. It's well about the knowledge. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, I would like to request respected Dr. Rohit Jigyasu, sir, Project Manager, ICC ROM Rome, for a discussion on topic. Framework needs to be developed in the near future to include more types of constructions, as well as to define similar guidelines for other types of hazards. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Vivek. Can I share the screen? So,
Yes, sir.
first of all, I would like to really thank.
You will be making PowerPoint presentation, no?
Yes, there will be a PowerPoint presentation. So I'll be just sharing that. So first of all, yes. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. All right. So first of all, thank you very much. Special thanks to Professor Santosh Kumar. Yes, as he rightly said, very old and very strong relationship we have had with NIDM. I still remember in 2004 when we had our first program on cultural heritage and disaster risk management, and I think NIDM has through continuous patronage has always included cultural heritage in the disaster risk management agenda. And I think it is really commendable and exemplary. I think we should even show it as an example to other countries in the world where cultural heritage actually doesn't figure. So here a premier disaster management organization in the country has taken it as one of the important areas. So I really wish to thank Professor Kumar and all the other members from NIDM who have played a role in this. Let me start by actually I'll try to answer the question that was raised as a topic of my lecture, and I try to make it more simplified in the sense maybe this will answer the kind of longer title that was given to me, assessing vulnerability and capacity for immovable cultural heritage. So Divya has already kind of given a very good outline on what heritage is and what is the scope as a tangible or intangible. But in my presentation today, I will focus on immovable cultural heritage. And let me start by, I'll pick on two or three main issues which then can be probably discussed later. First of all, I want to bring our attention to the fact that whether we talk about flooding, we know what happened in Western Europe very recently, last month, in fact, with floods damaging many historic cities and buildings. Two, also increased instances of fires again in Greece, in Italy and Turkey, which has again put a lot of cultural heritage at risk. And we also see that there are increased instances of storms, whether hurricanes or cyclones, and resulting incidents of even fire. So one of the major issues that I want to talk about when we think about immovable cultural heritage is how climate change is really having an impact on increased frequency and intensity of disasters, and how does that impact um, our immovable cultural heritage. And we all are aware of the increased instances, and you must have been all reading about the recent IPCC report, which kind of really presents a very grim scenario on what we may expect in the near future, both in terms of the changes in surface temperature and precipitation, and also in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So when the entire context of immovable cultural heritage is changing, when the temperature and humidity conditions are all going through such a big change, we need to think about what would be the impact on cultural heritage. Now, one of the things that we also need to think about is that climate change issues and disaster risk management issues are very closely interconnected. For a very long time, we have looked at them very separately, and it seems like it is not solving our issues. We are, in fact, facing increased hydrometeorological hazards or disasters because of the climate change impact. So we need to really bring these two supposedly very much connected issues, even though they have their own specificities also, together and see how cultural heritage has to be addressed in these kind of a scenario. So when we come down to historic structures, what does climate risk assessment entail? And this is an area which requires a lot more work. And I'm just going to take one example of one of the cathedrals in Germany, in Europe. And then I'm going to actually bring forward a very important issue which we have to consider, and that is how we can move from understanding the behavior of historic structures, our immovable heritage, from what we learned from the past to what may happen in the future. And that kind of predictive modeling for historic structures, for our different kinds of immovable cultural heritage, has to be really looked at. And that requires us to also look at different levels, different scales, right from the regional level. And I'm here just mentioning one of the projects which has been done, where ICROM has also been involved, where we look at the larger scale and then gradually move down to looking at the impacts at the smaller scale. So moving from the regional level to the local context, to the actual building level, to the impacts on the interiors and special decorations or finishes that are there. And we need to kind of overlap the climatic modeling that has been taking place. And many times this is a challenge, which I think Divya also brought out, that heritage field is so much disconnected from the climate field and from the climate science and from disaster risk management field, that we are not able to really overlay or make analysis of the so that we can analyze the impact of the climatic modeling that is done on how it is going to affect our immovable cultural heritage and its components in the future. So this is where we need to put a lot of effort, and we need to really have joint research, and also on the basis of that research, we need to have more capacity building initiatives which can really help us, first of all, identify how our immovable cultural heritage with its very unique materials, this is another issue which I'm going to come to later also. The construction materials, the structure systems are very, very different. And we need to actually understand that their behavior is not going to be the same as contemporary construction materials and the building. So we need to kind of do a systematic analysis of the cultural heritage in India in terms of the materials and construction systems, and then analyze how this kind of a changing scenario is going to have an impact on the behavior. And just for an example, we also need to be aware that the kind of hazards that we talk about are also going through a transformation. And therefore, we can no longer use the same understanding of hazards as we have now or had in the past to what may be in the future. There are instances where there were no termites and we see the instances of termites, which means that they make these structures very weak and vulnerable. So if tomorrow an earthquake comes, these structures are much more at risk than they would have been in the past. So we need to see how these kind of changing climatic conditions is increasing vulnerability to different hazards. And in that sense, we need to understand what we need to do in the future. So very importantly, we need to have modeling, we need to have scenarios, and we need to work with them and understand and then develop our strategies, which cannot be the same as we have been using until now. So then I want to move to three more main points. What do we need to ensure sustainability of immovable cultural heritage in the light of climate change? So this is something we need to think about. Should we go for mitigation for climate change, mitigation for disaster risks, or adaptation, or a combination? Again, we need to have a lot of discussion on this issue. And I also want to bring another point, which is that how can we integrate climate action in our planning and design interventions at various levels, starting from the site to the entire region. So this kind of a scaling down or scaling up is really necessary, and we need to work further on it. Here I would like to mention that just recently we have been working on updating of the climate change policy for World Heritage properties, and the new policy actually makes a lot of recommendations which are very much focused on what you need to do, rather than really talking large. And we have for a long time been talking about what may happen and creating these grim scenarios, but it is high time that we start to see how those grim scenarios of climate change are actually going to have an impact on the hazards and the vulnerability to various immovable cultural heritages. So the other point that I want to bring then in this discussion, and again answering to the longer question that was raised, is how we should look at our historic buildings, our vernacular heritage, in terms of not just as those assets that are weak or vulnerable, but as assets that can actually tell us a lot of knowledge that we must apply in today's context. And there I would like to talk about a few examples for which are quite well known, but I would like to just mention them again. For example, after Gujarat earthquake, again, they were mentioned about what happened then. We have plenty of examples that show how the constructions that were vernacular or many of historic buildings had in fact some interesting knowledge that was very much in line with the local availability of materials, and also in terms of the resistance to earthquakes. So again, what kind of knowledge is there which is contextually or locally developed, which we need to really understand, and then we need to incorporate? Because again, I want to come back to the framework. The problem that we have at the moment is that many of our building bylaws, building guidelines, uh, which are for earthquake resistance or other kind of addressing other kind of hazards are not taking into account traditional materials and construction systems, and therefore they cannot be applied. And that really requires us to work a lot more, because even if, for example, if we talk about concrete, the bands, concrete band to reinforce historic buildings, any kind of building, we forget that actually these kind of bands also exist in many traditional constructions, and probably they have much more relevance than going for new materials, especially if they are more expensive. So we need to kind of think about not just always new constructions, but also think about how we can retrofit the constructions that are already there, that already have a traditional knowledge, and probably it needs a little bit of upgradation. So we have plenty of examples, and I'm just showing to you some of them. For example, in Kashmir earthquake in 2005, a lot of new structures which were poorly done because just people could not afford them, they've collapsed. There were a lot of damages there. But many structures, such as this one in Poonch and the other one in Srinagar, were in fact performing much better. But then this is not there in the engineering vocabulary that exists today. So how can we mainstream the traditional construction knowledge that is there, which is embedded in many of these immovable heritage assets, and then use them, because there is a lot of application that we can have in the contemporary context. While I say that, I will also like to mention that we cannot just romanticize about these. We need to make them contextualized in the current situation, because a lot of them might not be just viable. Maybe because the kind of wood used originally or older wood is no longer available today. So we need to find a replacement. So we need to think of two things. One is, how can we upgrade our traditional knowledge so that it is more applicable in today's context, and how we can save a lot of those structures which actually exemplify and show that knowledge from what it has evolved over time. And so this is again from Marathwada. Again, you see that a lot of examples here which show how these structures have actually very interesting joinery details, which have in fact enabled these constructions to perform. So it's not about resisting earthquakes. There is a flexible joinery which helps in a kind of movement, which doesn't, the structures don't break down, but they somehow, maybe get deformed. And that way they save lives of people. So there's a lot of interesting knowledge that is there in these structures. I think we need to mainstream it so that it is known widely. And it is also very much connected to how much support we give to our traditional craftsmen. So it's not just that the knowledge is important, but the bearers of that knowledge is also important. And when we look at in Latur or Marathwada region today, many of these craftsmen have just disappeared because we somehow didn't give patronage, support, didn't upgrade their skills. We rather went for a completely new kind of contemporary construction techniques. I'm not trying to say that they are not important. Even new construction techniques have to be used and are important, but we have to also see what are those local traditional techniques which can be upgraded, which can be used, because the important thing is that they are more sustainable, because stone is locally available, poor people can really afford it, and therefore heritage has to be seen as an asset and not always as something that is vulnerable and you need to protect. So the last part of my presentation is going to really give some important points on what are those underlying reasons for physical vulnerability of immovable heritage that we need to really address. There are countless examples where, because of this kind of confusion between what to use from the traditional knowledge, and we don't even understand the contemporary or the modern construction materials. So, and people cannot afford it as well. The result is that we are trying to construct a hybrid constructions using all kind of materials, not even having enough knowledge of what a concrete band really is supposed to do. And at the end, we end up creating more vulnerable structures. And that's where I see that there is a lot of important contribution that heritage can make to improving even the building culture of today, where we can actually make use of a lot of this traditional knowledge. And as Divya pointed out, I would also say that documentation is the key. If we don't document this knowledge, if we don't understand how this knowledge can be useful, then this knowledge will either be disappearing or it will remain in books for researchers, but will not find anything in practice. And equally important is the design element of our heritage. There's a lot of knowledge again on how you use courtyards, how the design itself is oriented towards understanding the local climatic conditions, the way of life of people, their economic livelihood aspects. So that's also something which has to be brought in. There is so much I told you that if we don't support these traditional craftsmen, a lot of these traditional skills will disappear, and we will no longer be able to use. So this is one example where the Vada had, which was all built in traditional construction, had survived very well, but people were so scared because our professionals have not been able to give them solutions on how to make these stone constructions viable, or upgrade them, or even tell them that they are more safe. And so out of fear, they move to these kind of tin sheds, which are actually even more unhealthy, and make them more vulnerable. So that's also another issue we need to think of. Many times we also have to think about how the design of a traditional construction, the vernacular heritage, is important not just from the point of view of its form, but also how it is linking to the local material, as I mentioned earlier. So there were these bamboo houses, but if you replace this bamboo with concrete, you may keep the same form because it is very good against flooding, but then it becomes very vulnerable to earthquake, because you create soft stories, and soft story is not good against earthquakes. So understanding of traditional knowledge of vernacular buildings, historic structures, has to be done from all perspectives, from the perspective of design, construction, materials, and very importantly, sustainability in the long run. So that's what I would like to say through my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was a powerful presentation. Give us knowledge to analyze, assessing vulnerability and capacity of immovable cultural heritage. You said about floods in Germany and Belgium, July 2021. You said about greenhouse gas emission scenario and the associated risk, interrelationship between climate action and disaster risk management. It very well said, sir. Climate for culture. You also discuss a historic building traveling through time and space with module growth risk map scenario A1B. And you raise a question very wisely: how can we integrate climate action in our planning and design interventions? You tell about, sir, Bhungas. You also discuss aspect about the Northern Kashmir earthquake 2005. And further, you said pre-disaster building systems. You discuss about the traditional craftsmen, warders, Gawandi, Patrawat, suitors. And last point is very important about natural or cultural disasters. And finally, you said about the documentation is the key. You said very right, sir. Afterwards, you said new development in Manjoli Island, Assam. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Vivek, keep requesting people for in the chat box for questions, so that in the end we
Yes.
can have question answer also.
Yes, sir. Sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir. Now, moving on to the next panelist of the session, I would like to request respected Sri Pankaj Dharendra sir, Superintendent Archaeology and Museums, Government of Rajasthan, for a discussion on topic, and force the development of adequate emergency plans accounting for the evacuation of those collections, including the necessary logistics and human resources that might be required. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me for the session. And as I had spoken to Vivek that due to some emergency, I have just come and joined the session. And lot has been said by Mr. Divya Gupta and Mr. Rohit Jigyasu. And many examples have been given. I will directly come to the point. As due to unforeseen circumstances, I was not able to prepare the presentation and I was not ready even to participate. But still, whatever knowledge I have, I will share with you. So it has already been written a lot that what a museum should have if any disaster takes place: heat smoke detectors, humidity, indoor inventor sensors, security systems, manually operated alarms, physical barriers and mechanical barriers, and the security system which is based on this X-ray scanners, metal detectors, handheld scanners, closed circuit television monitoring, automated door barriers. These things should be there in the museums. And whenever a disaster takes place, there should be a clearly marked evacuation route, which should have signs which are universally understood. And the evacuation route should be tested through the drills and trainings and exercises. Evacuation should be discussed and coordinated with local emergency responders, such as the fire station, local police station. So all these things have already been written and have been discussed in the previous sessions of this National Institute for Disaster Management. I will just discuss my recent experience regarding a disaster which took place on the check post at Amir on the surrounding Parkota wall. And it was only possible to rescue people because of some things. See, as a superintendent of Amir Fort, I keep visiting the police station. I meet the in charge. I go to the rescue team, the civil defense officers. So when the disaster took place, it was not in Amir, it was not in the Amir Palace, but the news flashed that the lightning has hit Amir. But it was not basically Amir, it was far away. The surrounding 7.5 kilometers wall on the hill where the checkpost exists. This disaster took place and it consumed 16 lives, but we were able to rescue 25 people and they were alive. So this was only possible because Amir Fort has a security system. Amir Fort has its own civil defense team. Amir Fort is in coordination with the police station and with the local hospital. There is an ambulance available over here. So when the disaster took place, the local people, they came for help because we are in interaction with them and they are also aware of the problems which are faced in Amir. So the local people also came with their jeeps. We provided the ambulance. The SP asked us to provide some lights because it was evening. So we had 2 dragon lights and 10 searchlights with high beam. And we had our own civil defense people. There were 10 of them. So we started the rescue operation as soon as the disaster took place. And later on, all were informed and people came in and we were able to do it. The search operations were there till whole night, but the people who were dead were not rescued. And the question which came in mind that day was that if at all that disaster had taken place in Amir, then what would have been the situation in the Amir Palace? So we discussed the matter with the authorities, and now we are planning to take steps. If such disasters takes place next time, we must be prepared. We have already put up signages. We are getting the lightning investor system installed in Amer, in the palace, and all such operations, for example, first aid, etc., will be given. And this is all what I have to say. I have just come to join this seminar because I was invited, but due to unforeseen circumstances at home, I could not prepare anything. So thank you. म्यूट में चला गया क्या सर?
Thank you, sir. Sir, it is a wonderful presentation you said about the Amer Palace evacuation routes, science, exercise, local responsibility. You said after that disaster took place, checkpost on Amer visiting. You shared the experience with us about the visiting police station and how you rescue the peoples with civil defense. Search lights, high beams, teamwork. About you said what the importance of the teamwork and about the information, and you said about the future planning, what we should have done, what we have to do in future. Thank you, sir.
So due to emergency, I would like to leave because I have to reach hospital again, and I had come to just speak a few words here. So I'm sorry that I'm going back.
Thank you very much, Pankaj-ji, and we can understand. So please take care, and I hope everything is all right. May
Yes, sir.
bless you and also your
There is
family.
there is an emergency, and I have to go.
Yeah, please.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
please go ahead. We will get in touch with you.
Okay,
Yeah.
sir. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Now, moving on question and answer session. The first question we have from the participant. Participant ask a question from Rohit sir. How do you propose protecting natural world heritage sites such as Sundarbans from high intensity cyclones?
Okay, so there is no one solution on what you can do. There are a lot of things that need to be looked at. So first thing I would like to say is that when we talk about natural world heritage sites like Sundarbans, we need to think about how different components of the site, whether it's the vegetation, the flora and the fauna, different species of animals, and also vernacular heritage, because a lot of people, tribals are living there. How all these different components, which are part of the heritage value of Sundarbans as a World Heritage, are impacted because of cyclone. So the first step is to really make a risk assessment. And secondly, I would say that with the involvement of different stakeholders, including the State Disaster Management Authority, the local environment department, the municipality, we need to get, and of course, very importantly, local community-based organizations. One needs to really involve all of them and try and develop very simple strategies, which can be put in place in three aspects. One is what can be done so that, for example, vernacular structures, the roofs don't fly away. So can we do some simple retrofitting for those structures? Can we have a simple kind of a solution for making sure that at least we may not be able to save all the vegetation, but maybe there are some old vegetation, there are some species which are of very high importance. Maybe we need to prioritize and do some specific interventions for them. So prioritization is really, really important, because in such wide areas, we cannot do everything for every aspect. So prioritization has to be there. And then preparedness, which is the key. Before a cyclone happens, how prepared we are to move people to safe locations, to make sure that if there is any vegetation which has or important trees or species are affected, do we have some emergency measures to take care of them? Have we actually put in place protocol or a kind of a standard operating procedure to address heritage? And of course, the priority lies in saving people. But then, as part of the process, maybe at a certain stage, you need to also think about other aspects of heritage and the protocol for responding to them. So I think a lot of measures need to be done. What's more important is to make a good assessment and prepare a very operational plan in place. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You said
Yeah, Vivek, just a
yes, sir.
let me, like what Dr. Rohit has mentioned, one is this multi-sectoral people has to be engaged in this, like Sundarban. And similarly, when we were listening to the presentation made by Divyaji, so Divya Gupta Sahab was mentioning, and he also made a statement about disaster management plan. So there also it comes as a kind of a disaster plan is not a kind of a one sector archaeology department or INTAC or should be there. So we wish to know definitely this or our people who are attending that if such kind of multi-sectoral engagements have to be done, then how to start, like suppose INTEC is taking lead at one place and say on the other place archaeological department is taking lead somewhere. So, or say forest department is taking lead somewhere. So how do you suggest the processes which have been done elsewhere? And now 20 years have also gone after Gujarat and other place also. You people must have seen many of the places that internationally it is being done differently, and especially UNESCO site and other site. So how do you suggest that one should capture those things and in terms of suggesting our own people?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point, Professor Santosh, that you have raised. And I can tell you one or two examples. One is from Japan, where, in fact, if we think about Kyoto municipality, there is a section on heritage, and there is a very close cooperation or kind of a agreement already with the heritage department. So regular inspections are done by the disaster management agencies, by the fire department, by the other kind of so that it's not only the responsibility of the heritage department, it is a shared responsibility. And already there are kind of there are shared protocols for response if something happens. So this kind of system has worked so efficiently, because even when the disaster management department produces hazard maps, these hazard maps are also made available to all the heritage sites, to the heritage institutions. So they can see where their site is, where their museums are, and then they can already identify, oh, my museum is actually in a very high flood vulnerable area. So I need to do something about it. So this kind of a preparation in advance is the key, I feel. So Japan is of course one example, and the other example I would like to state here is from UK. English Heritage, again, it's a private. So I also want to mention, because INTAC is also a organization which is not government organization, but but it is of course having very good alliance with the government, in the sense like it gives advisory role. And similarly, English Heritage has a very again, it's not a government entity, it's quite a semi public entity, but it has a very close pre-established collaboration with the heritage department, with the heritage institutions. So they know what kind of things need to be done together in advance. And even in terms of funding, this is also something very important, because many times our problem starts because the fundings are allocated separately. So how do we put the whole funding together? And so in the policy document that is there before, they actually ask for the funding. The funding channel is for common programs, it's not really divided. And that I think is a very important step, because the moment you recognize, even from the resource allocation side, that there has to be a resource allocation for some common programs, then you are better able to implement such kind of intersectoral departmental collaborations.
Yeah.
Very, very good proposition which you have narrated. Let us hear Mr. Gupta also.
Yeah.
Similar. Yeah, your quick response to this.
Yeah. Thank you, Sundarji. Yeah. I mean, like Rohit said, I can give a few examples from India itself. After the Amsara Act of 2010, where the 100-meter was declared as no construction and the other one is regulated, thankfully, most of the ASI protected monuments are now placed on the Bhuvan map. So any particular person, I mean, this was not there. Like, if you were to, I mean, in a disaster situation, you could not even locate them in that sense. So at least that has happened. And they also have a 100-meter, 200-meter ring around them. I feel that now there is time that exercise now needs to be extended to other heritage. So like at least their placement on the map is there. So if you were making any development plan, even for urban development plan or disaster management plan, you are aware where these buildings are, what are the sort of difficulties in assessing them, accessing them, and also in case of a disaster, how to reach them. So, and also I think you will also, once you are making a disaster management plan for a particular area, you'll also know what sort of heritage you are looking at. So that is one. The second is that, because I think we don't have maybe a centralized system, the responsibility is very much spread over large amount of agencies or departments. So I think largely the disaster response team or the task force that are created for that may need to have this sort of information on heritage. Many times they do not. Like, to give an example, when we were looking at the disaster management plan of National Museum, there were no representation from the National Museum in the task force. So let's say there's a fire, the fire department will just come and they will immediately maybe just put water all over the National Museum, and because of which perhaps in that disaster, I mean, whatever the fire would have damaged, the water would have also damaged maybe more. So this information, so there was no mechanism to look at. So I think in the disaster management, this task force has been proposed, which has been sort of approved in principle at least. The third is including a lot of this heritage within the master planning. Now, what happens, like in a disaster situation, or for that matter, even in normal situation, till the heritage has certain level of statutory standing, it is not really looked at in terms. So the listings that INTAC has, the master plans should identify these buildings or heritage areas specifically, so that once they have certain standing, or even if it's not statutory, but certain recognition, then I think their policies or could be developed or strategies could be developed. There are several examples, like the new master plan for Delhi, if you have looked at, it has these sort of provision. The policies, the tourism policy of Gujarat recently launched, also has these sort of provisions. And adding to the two examples that Rohit gave for from Japan and UK, I would also like to add, I mean, which I find is a very interesting example, is from Cambodia. At least for World Heritage, they have they create an authority. I think in India also this has been tried, like in Hampi and in Majoli, where there is a single window sort of authority. All aspects of that particular region, be it rural development, be it heritage, be it education, collapses into a single authority. So they look after that particular site, and they, in that mode, are able to look at the site in a more comprehensive way. I mean, I understand the sites, they're a little different than India, but at least the control and command is very well defined in these sites because of a single decision-making body there. And that is another example. And this body again is not left on there. There are national level of monitoring, there's international level of monitoring because they are also World Heritage Sites. So these sort of examples we can also look at in terms of ease of maybe management of these particular sites.
Thank you very much. It's 2 points, or rather 3 points, have emerged out of your interjection in this point. One, that what Dr. Rohit said, that hazard, risk and vulnerability, sharing of that document is very, very important. And when in talk, or for that matter, any archaeological points, or maybe the heritage city, if they are, or if that city plan, whether that incorporating, and you mentioned about Delhi, and maybe Ahmedabad is another. Suppose
Jaipur,
there is a situation. Yeah, Jaipur is also. Yeah. So suppose there is a situation like say Bodh Gaya. Bodh Gaya is a international heritage, but World Heritage. And if we are and if it's fall into the zone 4 as an earthquake. Now, if the plan of Gaya district, whether they are focusing as a Bodh Gaya as a kind of a major concern in the disaster management plan or not, what Rohit was saying, hazard, risk and vulnerability. And similarly, when we are making, say, that heritage, Bodh Gaya itself, whether has a plan or not in that particular area, because that is a whole of the area is of all Buddhas, monasteries and temples. So it has own significance. And the third thing is, which is coming up, whether the enough financing is there for actually taking such initiatives. Like say, if heritage city itself start, or Buddha, each monastery would start taking up initiative, like say Bodh Gaya is one temple is of Indian heritage and Ashoka temple is there. Another, we can say Thai temple is there. Another is built by Japanese, other built by Chinese. So now that comes, that's all contributed to a one. Somebody must be managing that management. So if they wish to start, or if the Gaya district start, or the Bodh Gaya start, how that can get integrated? You gave the example, both of you are giving example of Japan. Whether they could do, and what kind of a mechanism they adopted. Can you little more clarify on that, so that similar spots in India is full of spots like that. I'm just giving a narrative, like Mr. Dhirendra was telling about the Amer Fort. So similarly, there are many forts, Jodhpur Fort, other forts, and how to start that kind of a culture of disaster risk reduction and preparedness in the whole of the heritage and tourism as a kind of a key concern, and funding with the content liability within the department, how it will go, or whether they need to depend on the finance commission allocation, which they can seek from the departmental budget, and archaeology, the national government budget. So in this kind of a scenario, suppose we are starting some work with them and we are having a dialogue. And so what kind of a good practices which we can quote and we can say that, yes, this could be done. So can you highlight these two issues also? Then we will go to the like Sundarban area as another part of that. Yes, please. Any of you can start.
Divya, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, thing is that there is already an established administrative system within our country. Like there is a district commissioner, which is the collectorate is there. Then there is the municipal corporation or the development authorities are there. So what I'm saying is that the information on heritage is sort of not available to them. What Rohit was mainly saying, in Japan, this information is freely available. So that anyone who's making these particular plans, be it a disaster plan or an urban development plan, this information is incorporated. It is integrated within the system. Now, unfortunately, the heritage information sits outside the system. For one, because a lot of heritage, that's what my point was, that for one, because a lot of heritage is not protected, is not recognized as heritage. So once, at least in terms of an information system, as a single information system that can be created, and I gave you an example of Bhuvan on how several of the ASI monuments are being protected from urban development is because now they have put these pins all over India. So anyone who wants to even construct a house knows that, like, they cannot do it if it is falling within that 100. So if they can place their plot of land and say, no, this is in 100 meters, even ASI will come to know if somebody is creating that house in that 100 meter, because they can go to Bhuvan and say, oh, somebody is constructing. That's what I was saying, like, remote monitoring. Like somebody from Delhi also can just can keep seeing these 100-meter circles around the monuments, or these 200, and say, oh, this is no construction. How is the road coming there? How is the swimming pool coming there? So I'm saying, firstly, the first step is to create that information system, which is as of now lacking. One, or lacking or limited. Only a few of these World Heritage cities like Ahmedabad, Jaipur, aspiring cities like Delhi, Pondicherry are creating these sort of systems. But if it becomes part of the system, it will help. The second is about responsibilities. Now, in terms of the responsibilities, again, because this sort of heritage is not recognized, one has to depute that, okay, this is an agency that is responsible for these things, which is generally the municipal corporation or the development authorities, which has to be responsible. If there is no municipality or municipal corporation, then this particular responsibility should lie for the region on the DM, like the example that you gave for Bodh Gaya. Now, Bodh Gaya is a World Heritage, but the World Heritage includes a very small area of Bodh Gaya. Now, several of these areas have dense archaeological sites, and very recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, they discovered a major archaeological site at the backyard of the Bodh Gaya temple, because there was some development or a hotel or something was proposed. When they started digging foundation, they realized that this is an archaeological site. Thankfully, the government of Bihar protected that area. Now want to develop it. So a lot of these areas, I mean, if such thing happen, then they should be again and sort of an SOP or a responsible agency that should take action on this. We don't have that agency which can look after the monuments or heritage building that are beyond the state or the central government protection. So this responsibility has to be thrust upon someone, like the DM or something, and they should say, okay, fine, now this is heritage of our city or our district, and we will look after them if there is a disaster or if there is a threat to that heritage in any scenario, even from urban development. And lastly, I was saying this about funding issue that you had mentioned. I mean, in fact, not lastly, the third is that people needs to be involved in this process. Like that's what I gave you an example of crowdsourcing. The people are telling, this heritage is not protected. This mapping process or this, people have to be involved so that the communities are involved. Otherwise, I think the moment these areas are imposed, then people find that, okay, this is an imposition on them and heritage, they will not be able to develop their land or not do farming. A lot of misconceptions start. So that's the third point on how we are involving the people in these processes, the local communities, the local residents. And lastly is about funding. And funding, as I understand, is already there in the sense of in several aspects, like, even the government of India, there are several schemes like the Smart City, Amrit, Hirday, I mean, the tourism thing, Swadesh. So, I mean, one is that, so they can avail these funding also for these particular aspects. Like, I mean, there is a large amount of funding now available for making GIS maps of several cities. All they need to do is put heritage as one of the layers there. As of now, they're only doing for tax collection. I mean, the whole system is sort of geared towards the making GIS or these things for tax collection things. But if you tweak a little bit, you can also add certain other layers at a fraction of additional cost. This information can also be made available to the city or to the policymakers if you add that aspects within that particular survey. And funding as such, I don't think, in my experience, not the issue per se. There's enough funding, but the prioritization or unlocking it for heritage is an issue. And I somehow feel that heritage in most cases can pay for itself. It can be made sustainable. If you start looking at it as reuse, you can have several other aspects of if like I think Rohit also gave example, like instead of new construction, the efforts could be in retrofitting. Now the retrofitting will cost you half the cost than new construction. It is not that you will be able to retrofit all the heritage buildings or not avoid, I mean, you'll not be able to avoid reconstruction in post-disaster, but what sort of buildings you are constructing is one. And secondly, what sort of heritage buildings stock you can also reuse for your own purposes. As of now, we only look at them as museums or hotels, but we don't tend to look at them as schools or even disaster shelters and or community infrastructure. If they start to become like that, integrate within the development process, I think then they will be, the vulnerability or risk to them will be eliminated. I will not say, will be reduced considerably.
Thank you. Very elaborate answer you have given, and it is very, very convincing also, and lot of options you have suggested. Rohit, what do you suggest? What Mr. Gupta has said?
No, I think
And
Vivek has already brought out all the important points. Just wanted to add one more thing, and that's coming again from the experience I've had in Japan, that the role of community-based organizations is very critical in this, because they are the ones who are sometimes raising the, from right from the childhood. First of all, there's a big awareness about disaster risk management in general, but also cultural heritage. So if you go to the museum they have prepared for in Kobe, there's actually a whole thing which is focused on cultural heritage. So right from your childhood, you are very much aware of the importance of protecting heritage in disasters. And that also is stimulated more by the community-based organizations who really are so much aware that they sometimes influence the public policies. They sometimes influence how, and so it is very easy for communities to really participate in kind of spearheading as the first responders. They are the ones who are there to be ready and be prepared, and they ask the public institutions to support them. So I think the importance of the community-based organizations is one thing that we must try to focus on, because everything cannot be relied on the official formal systems. Both the civic society movement and the policies and the public, the institutions' practices are important. The second point I want to also mention, which is I found very inspiring, is the role played by academic institutions, the universities, because a lot of faculty in academic institutions are actually playing a very important role as advocates for this. They are the ones who actually bring a lot of research that is done to actually contribute and sometimes contribute even as advocates. So they support public institutions to provide solutions on how do you, for example, deal with fire in historic areas, how do you deal with flooding issues. So the role of universities, academic institutions also needs to be somehow supported in this whole effort.
Thank you. This is a very insightful that most of the states and the districts, almost each district have the universities and educational system, and they're the heritage site, and if they could be brought in. And most of the universities also have the ancient history department also. So they can bring those heritage, and those researches could be very, very useful. And those resources should be tapped, and community engagement, both of you are highlighting that without community, probably our goal would not be achieved. So how to bring those into a forefront? And one question also have come up that recently I visited some, dear panelists, recently I visited some historical monuments in Kashmir during a local festival in July 2021. Local youths were burning firecrackers inside the heritage site, and there were nobody to prevent them to damage. Their sites will be destroyed soon if the local youths are inside the heritage, and there was nobody to prevent them. So in such kind of the rules must be there to protect that heritage site if you're doing damage to the heritage site. But another thing is this, in this question you would respond that how community and other can help and local administration. But I would raise one question along with this so that you can answer in combined format. That the local administration said the district magistrate is in charge of the district disaster management plan, and also the protection of this heritage also. And most of the heritage site is owned by kind of a local archaeological department, or largely with the government of India also. So how these combination would work or working with the district magistrate office in coordination of when we talk about protection of heritage, whether they have to go for FIR or they have the local policing, and so that kind of changes which are occurring, some with intended and some with without intention also. Please.
Okay, I just quickly respond, and maybe Vivek can add and give his views as well. I feel like, and it has been mentioned earlier also, the challenge we have in our country is that responsible organizations for heritage are so much um, kind of separated from the larger system of governance, be it a place or a region, that they work in a very in a very isolated manner. So this is where the entire issue is. We have to make sure that it's not sometimes important just to have coordination between two entities, but you also have to formally recognize heritage as an important sector within the system of governance at the district level. And that is not there. So if you don't create that structure, the coordination will never happen. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention is just to link to the fact that the community, they are burning crackers and they are not aware of it. I also want to mention that, in fact, we have many good examples in India also. The Indian Museum in Kolkata is doing very interesting work where they use museum also as a place for awareness raising. So you use cultural institutions, you use public places to also raise awareness among young people, among children, on the importance of cultural heritage. So they are more sensitive to what they do and what they should not do. And I think we need to do much more of that kind of work. Museums are not just a place for people to visit, they are also public places where people can come and actually participate in a lot of advocacy, and awareness raising. and that also has to be somewhere there, because we need to address it at different levels. I mean, it cannot be all put in responsibility only in with one entity, you know. That would be my response. Maybe Deve would like to add.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to deal with this question a bit sociologically. And, the thing is that, like Rohit rightly pointed, because of certain historic reasons, and I think because largely also because of the colonial past, and maybe to a certain degree, even after 75 years, certain policies we are continuing with the same colonial mindset. And one of it was really related to keep the heritage away from its own people. And I think that is perhaps sociologically, it needs to now change of integrating and mainstreaming heritage with the communities. The people burning crackers and all that, perhaps they're not doing it intentionally, but they're not really seeing the heritage value of that particular place. They're only looking at like an open area where they can burn crackers. Perhaps they would not do it if they would have really seen or know about the merits or know about the significance of the sites. In all probability, they would perhaps not do it. This is where I think what Rohit is saying about awareness generation becomes also a lot an important aspect. And of course, India is a very large country. We've been doing it for a long time, but I think it needs to be tackled more from a sociological as well as from an educational point of view. And a lot of people have talked about integrating even heritage within the curriculum. I mean, in our schools, we are not really know about heritage, or in fact, we have a very national narrative. So most probably that particular person who's burning cracker may not have ever heard or read about those local sites as heritage. He may have known about the Red Fort or the Taj Mahal, which he would have never visited, but not about their local history. So we're not told about the local history in our curriculum from the day one, like unlike in Japan, many other countries. The other part is that I find that the role of civil society, and I would also like to bring here, media plays a lot of important role. And I think like if you, the lot of awareness that has been created for Delhi's heritage, and including Ahmedabad and several other cities, is also largely because of the media's continued role as a monitor and as an awareness generator. So I think the role of media also needs to be brought out here on what they need to do. I mean, if heritage is on their agenda locally, it adds a lot and lot of awareness to the people. Like, if I mean, look at Delhi, like every day you will find something of the heritage in the newspaper, especially the more popular one. And if not in the whole week, then definitely on Saturday, Sunday, you'll have a large piece on heritage, both in Hindi and English. And so I think that also needs to be maybe strengthened, because we own, like Rohit rightly pointed, we don't not necessarily look at the statutory bodies. We have to look at these roles, to spread the sort of awareness or spread these responsibility on a larger civil society, media, NGOs, and the government, and all of them needs to support each other. Where also I want to bring, and I really want to emphasize on the role of academic institution. Now, unfortunately, again, the parallels, I mean, like the way Rohit has mentioned in Japan, the academic institution almost integrated within the formal system. So several universities would be actually doing, like, let's say tomorrow, the kind of things that we have said, like, identification of the heritage at risk, the areas that are vulnerable, the areas that needs to be documented. Large amount of this exercise, the academia would be doing in several countries. So it's like, again, you were talking about in terms of funding. So, the government gets a lot of this information ready-made from the academia, and they all need to do is perhaps spend or do take strategies, prepare strategies on this. Because you have to realize, unlike the government, academia has the largest incubation period. Like, So the several students or something can continuously work on these particular aspects for 10 years. Unlike the very short span, short attention span of the government, or with the concurrent with a particular officer for 2-3 years, how much can he do? Academic institutions have large incubation period. They can continue to work on these projects if given, because they have large students. So I mean, again, I'm emphasizing that we need to start integrating a lot of our effort. Each of these efforts are happening parallelly. I mean, I'm also recognizing Intact's efforts also to a certain degree quite parallel. And but because I think there, and whenever we want to overlap, we do overlap. But it's not sort of integrated within a system.
Thank you. Both of you have responded and saying that community engagement is very much important. What we see that heritage itself is a big university and institution. Even if they are standing, I said in the morning also that it is standing and saying many things, only thing to be heard. And in that context, if I see that McDonnell and Kentucky or Lay's, they have come and gone down to the every individual, and they know what is there. When the moment you say Lay's, that imagination, it captures the imagination of the people. But you say that Humpty, probably people might not be able to capture those imaginations. Despite this, that system is existing since ages. But we have not been able to go down to this community. Maybe this kind of and when we see that community engagement which we want, that community is much more worried about the Lays than that Humphrey. So how that this transition can take place, once we start owning, then we start protecting our own thing. And the moment we, as you said, that British legacy was there and it is going out of the hands of the commoners, and it is very kind of a protected environment, and many things, and that how we are capturing and अपने पास गोद में रख लिया है, kind of, or easy access नहीं है लोगों को. So how these structures can actually bring those attraction. Probably those who are into it, like suppose I am there, I'm maintaining it, and it is not selling like Lays, or it's not selling like other products. Meaning thereby, despite being most expensive thing on this heritage, is that you all know that don't have to say how that that community engagement can be brought in for owning it and protecting it. This is the biggest challenge. Crowdsourcing you also mentioned. So people will be there to support such initiatives if that is they start owning it. They're recognizing that this is my pride. This is my past. This is my legacy. This is my thing. So from where we should start? Both of you have worked nationally, internationally. I see Rohit, because Vijay साहब से मेरी उतनी, दिव्य साहब से मेरी मुलाकात नहीं हुई है, जितना उन्होंने काम किया है मैं सुन के देख रहा हूँ. But Rohit, I have been seeing you. तो दोनों के presentation से ये लग रहा है कि this is very important to engage community, and that is not happening. So can you give that some trigger from where we can, whether Ministry of Tourism in Delhi or Department of Archaeology or the local panchayat that can think of, or the local bodies which think they may think there's an important source of revenue as well, and rather than, and also it is also a matter of pride to own it. So from where to start, where to trigger? Like NIDM doesn't want, it is not the prerogative of NIDM to get into this, but NIDM's prerogative is definitely to protect this, to help them in terms of the custodian of these heritage, to start appreciating these concepts of risk assessment, or that cyclonic storms, and IPCC report has come and we are saying that it will affect much more water crisis. It will affect the surge would be very high, wind speed would be very high, inundation would be very high. So whether in these environments, have they whole of archaeological fraternity and heritage fraternity have been able to recognize and appreciate those? And then community, and then they will talk to the community, look, we are into danger and you have to come and together we have to protect. From where we should start?
Yeah, it's a good question, but difficult one also.
Yes, I
Because
know.
first thing I would say is that it depends on the type of heritage we are looking at. Because if we are, of course, looking at nationally protected heritage, which is the responsibility of Archaeological Survey of India, I think that there has to be more programs where they already do quite a bit of outreach for the tourists, for the visitors, people who are visiting these sites. But if they start even including this aspect of disaster preparedness in the other kind of, we don't need to create a separate program. That's the sometimes the issue is that we think, well, if we need to raise awareness or create this kind of a, we need to have a special program which is only on. It is not going to happen because they will always say resources are not there. So I always feel that what really works well, and I have actually several good examples even from developing world, from my experience, is that they have actually included disaster related awareness among the different actors, visitors, communities, by including that as one of the aspects in the larger awareness and the programs that they do. So how can we integrate this aspect in what we do is very important. That's number one. So I think starting from the nationally protected monuments to the state protected monuments by the Department of Archaeology, at least in their programs, the outreach programs, this should be one of the components. That's one aspect. The other aspect I would say is more uh, heritage, which we call, as Deve has also been saying, unprotected heritage, which is not belonging to any particular formal institutional system. So while on one hand we fight for having them recognized, but while that happens, which is going to take a long time, there's a continuing struggle for decades now. We should at least identify who are the local custodians who may not be formally there. For example, if you go to Nizamuddin, there are this important heritage structure, and it is being taken care by the people living around them. So it's unprotected, but they are taking care of them. So how can we start working with the organizations who are more locally connected, or who are the local custodians, is that other level. So my response would be, we need to address this at multiple levels. But I again want to come back to Japan because for 16 years I've been working there, so I have plenty of examples there from there to say. But one thing that I also get very much inspired, and I think this is very practical, and I think we can use it even in our countries, is that they don't make separate programs for disaster risk management. Even for the fire protection in their World Heritage properties, they have included fire prevention as one of the activities they do when they have their cultural events. So it's not like they do a separate event for that. They actually do it as part of the other things, activities that they are doing. And also, all the systems that they have for fire prevention, they also use them for day-to-day basis, for washing, for cleaning, for gardening. So, people have the resources available, but they see that there is a multi-use, multi-purpose utilization of that resource. And fire prevention or disaster prevention is one of the uses among many other uses. That way there is more acceptability than saying, no, we will only use it when there is a fire. It also indirectly maintains it because people keep on using. Imagine you don't use, fire is going to happen maybe once in a year or 2 years, or and so maybe by then, if we really want to use it, water is stagnant, or has the pipes have got
Clogged.
blocked because you're not using it. So there is also that kind of effectiveness. So I would really think of these ideas which are going to be more effective.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you,
I'll just
Rohit.
add, I mean, these are all very important points that Rohit mentioned. And like for him, I mean, this is a very important question, and it's like the heart of everything that we are talking about in terms of heritage, but a very difficult one. But, I mean, from my 30 years of experience, I think that the two things can really works. And I'm again talking somehow, Rohit is an academician, so he's giving more solutions, and I'm a practitioner, I'm giving more theory. But I think theoretically, I feel that if we are able to create certain heritage solutions through the heritage knowledge system, that is the key. Because I somehow feel that right now, that photograph from Majuli, or that thing that Rohit showed in the end, is very telling. Now, because we have so much confidence on the engineered solutions, with all due respect, and not on the traditional system you're creating this. So thing is that I think again it's a legacy of the colonial past. A dam is the temple of our democracy. But not the temple itself. I mean, this is also a sort of certain baggage that we are carrying for a long time, that we are not looking at solutions from the heritage knowledge system for our requirement, because of which we have really lost the connection as well as the confidence in heritage. So we are really looking for every solution, we're looking at a very, very engineered solution. So the empirical part is sort of really lost. So that is one aspect that we should really start looking at solution from a heritage point of view, from a heritage knowledge bank that we have huge leave with us. A few examples Rohit also showed from construction and details, how to modernize it, not to romanticize, how to modernize, how to mainstream that construction. And again, Japan again is an example. Like, a lot of construction there happens using traditional technology. And also Cambodia. You look at their airport, it's a all modern construction use, but you get lot and lot of semblance of the heritage knowledge of the local construction system they've been using for generations, like for almost 2000 years of continued tradition is reflected in that. But this is not true for us here. The second is making heritage far more financially attractive. As of now, it is to a certain degree, it is not so financially attractive. We give, I'm not talking in terms of subsidies. I'm talking of certain incentives that can be given to the heritage sector, so that I think there is a more level playing field to it. In terms of, like, if we were using these heritage solution, let's say if we were using the bamboo, perhaps they're using bamboo because the government is giving subsidy to use the concrete for reconstruction. And if he was to bring the bamboo, he'll have to pay for himself. So, from Majuli, if I'm again giving that. But if I was using heritage solutions, the heritage materials, and if that is cheaper to me to use it, and then the modern material, I would definitely want to use it. I mean, most of the countries where I have worked in, there is far more subsidy, far more incentive to be doing conservation than if you were, like in America, you were getting close to about 30 to 40% rebate on your GST and your income tax if you were if you were conserving your heritage building. And if you were, let's say, to demolish it tomorrow and make a new one, you not only not get a incentive, but your cost will double up. So I don't think anybody would really like to not avail that financial incentive to be able to conserve rather than build. Here, that is not applicable. In fact, a person would rather say, oh, it is such a headache for if I were to go back and build it in my new material, then he'll not get permission to build in wood because it's supposedly environmentally unfriendly. He's not going to get those same bricks. He's not going to get this and the other, even if somebody tries. So these two things is what I think is the key to unlock the heritage problem. One is heritage-based solution to create confidence in our heritage. Other is to give financial attractiveness to these solutions.
Thank you. It's very interesting response from both of you. And Japan is coming again and again for best practices.
In Cambodia also, don't forget.
And you also mentioned Divya, about that US and you mentioned about the temple of democracy is the dam, and we have forgotten the temple of culture is the heritage.
Okay.
And so we do keep vouching for our rich heritage and culture. So how that can go into the mainstream. But last question maybe to both of you. NIDM has developed a kind of a post-disaster need assessment, this tools on the basis of ICLAC and other international practices. And now when we have to do and we have to start informing the state, we have to roll down. And then we are, when the large number of heritage gets affected. So, and the cost is very, very, we go and do largely there are other construction material or any houses or any infrastructure. We say that the replacement cost value at the current price level. This is that we take. And here we say, even if the what I see in the back of Mr. Dibya, of one small statue, and can we say that replacement cost value of that if it is a very, very old heritage kind of. And most of the museums are having very, very expensive, so because you cannot put any price tag to it. But when we do the damage assessment, and then suppose one national museum gets collapsed totally, how to make an assessment intact? And Rohit, you must be having on a long discourse on this. Can you guide us on that?
It's a very important question, Professor Santosh Kumar. It's very difficult, but still we need to do it because first of all, I would like to point out to a very important thing that has happened, that World Bank's PDNA has now cultural heritage as one of the chapters which never existed before. So there is actually a guidance now on how to evaluate, put a number to any heritage which is affected in a disaster situation. So there are a couple of ways in which one can do that. First of all, yes, something heritage is irreplaceable in that sense that you can never get it back. But but still, we need to kind of put a cost, at least in terms of uh, how much does it contribute as a revenue to the people, how much does it contribute in terms of sorry, to the government, how much does it contribute in terms of the yes, for the objects you can still say put a certain market value, but for immovable heritage, for buildings, you cannot put a market value. So but still you need to at least identify which are those high valued heritage assets, and if they get damaged, the cost of recovery, the cost of reconstruction is the way you calculate. So rather than putting value on what the value, heritage value is, you actually put a value on what does it need, what does it, how much it requires to rebuild, strengthen, retrofit, repair. And so a kind of a quick assessment of the kind of damages that have happened and what it will mean to put it back is the way you can actually put a cost, you know. So it's the recovery cost, it's the reconstruction cost that one has to evaluate. And then on top of that, you also need to put a cost in terms of how many livelihoods of the people are attached to that cultural asset, because a lot of these heritage sites have so many businesses around them, and those businesses are going to get affected. So on one hand is the revenue, that is collected by the government or by the responsible institution, on the other hand, is the livelihood which is associated. So you put a cost on that. And this cost is also associated with sometimes big festivals that are affected, because a lot of these festivals are attached to these kind of so there are multiple ways in which you can calculate the cost. Of course, it is not going to be replacing what is already lost, but it helps you to at least get money for heritage, because this is the biggest problem, as I'm sure you know, that when the money is given by donors, heritage is not figuring in that. So the first step for us, for any government where the disaster has happened, is to actually put in place a separate figure for heritage, calculated at least to the best possible extent. So that will at least ensure that some money comes, because for example, in Nepal, uh, because heritage was included in the PDNA exercise after 2015 earthquake, they could manage some money from the donors. Imagine if that was not there at all. In fact, there were a lot of issues with the way PDNA was done in Nepal, because, as you rightly said, people don't have the capacity to do the cost estimation for heritage. So either they avoid a lot of costs that should be included, or they do it in a wrong way. So we need to build a lot of capacity, and I think NDMA and NIDM can play a very important role. And I would recommend through this webinar that if you can actually organize a capacity building program on how to do PDNA for heritage, it will be very, very useful, in that situation. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to also respond to this?
Yeah, please, Mr. Gupta. You want to say something or add what Rohit has said?
Again, I think I'm sort of again going to go back to the same point. When we are looking at, and I think Rohit has beautifully also said it, I think when we are looking at a replacement value, we are only looking at the quantity part of it. I mean, we are not catering to the quality aspect of the replacement. I mean, I'm not also now talking only in terms of vernacular buildings, homes, and these local sort of heritage, not because, the protected monuments like Taj Mahal or Asa State are sort of irreplaceable at any cost. I mean, like at any cost, they have to be replaced. But the kind of question that arises for replacement value are for smaller local sort of buildings, people houses or schools, heritage, or these sort of buildings. So there I find that, when we are looking at a replacement value, we're only looking at a quantity part of it, not the quality part of it. Secondly, the cost of the new construction, again, the engineered solution is very well set. Like, you will be saying, okay, this is 30,000 square meter and plinth area, and that sort of is easy to calculate. Unlike in a heritage building, which may require certain more in-depth analysis, and we don't have like a square foot thumb rule for it. There also, we are not really catering that large amount of even the collapse part can be reused. We do not cater to that value, that the broken windows, doors can be repaired. So that sort of the so-called salvage value, we generally tend to take zero in a heritage building, which is not correct in an assessment. So we don't not take that aspect. We do say that, like, there is a possibility to reuse if it's a full collapse. Secondly, we are also only not looking at the not necessarily looking at the replacement value, but we sometimes tend to look at a restoration retrofitting cost, which generally is much less than the replacement value in that sense. And I think Rohit also mentioned a very important point in terms of the assessment, because we have very little sort of scientific data on the performance of the heritage buildings. Many a times we wrongly declare them as unfit or structurally repairable or restorable, because of which we have to do So this particular aspect really needs to be looked at, because if an engineer is looking at it, he would have never confronted these sort of buildings. So even if if I had examples in Gujarat where the buildings only had shaking of the tiles. It was structurally fine completely. But by the looks of the shaking of the tiles are spread all over. These buildings have been declared unrestorable or structurally unfit. Several of these were even demolished. So it is also important to build these capacities of assessment, proper structural engineers who can really properly assess heritage buildings' strength, so that we don't perhaps have to replace them fully. They can, most of them can be repaired and restored at a fraction of cost of their replacement. The second is the replacement value is only looking at an immediate cost, which is basically the capital cost. Now look at the recurring cost of the replacement value. The air conditioning, the electricity load, everything will increase. Now, most of these heritage buildings, some have certain passive cooling features within them. Because of this, they were cooler. Even when they had thicker walls, they required less electricity. And these aspects we don't tend to focus when we are looking at these. And of course, like Rohit said, we are also not at times looking at the kind of jobs it will create, with the kind of the livelihood issues we are also not. So I think the replacement cost cannot be A to A. It has to be A plus B plus C plus D for heritage buildings.
Thank you very much. We have exceeded 5 minutes, but it was so interesting that I could not resist in asking questions, because with the two stalwarts on this sector, and we were learning a lot of things, and which I could gather personally for the benefits of all the participants. The point which you people have been able to raise is that one is that to start with when we wish to make this sector resilient, then we want to bring up hazard risk and vulnerability in the DM planning process. That is much more important, and that is possible only when we do that engagement of the local community. The local community is very powerful message which you people have given, and how that can get included into the disaster management plan also of the districts, or maybe if local bodies they have the plan, then if the village have, depending on in which vicinity it is falling. The third important point which you talked about, various funding available options available in the heritage sector, whether it's the form of smart cities or in the form of crowdsourcing, or in the GIS map or Swadesh and all, and collaborating it with the example of Japan. And the point is coming as that instead of putting a separate program, why not have an integrated program within the heritage one? So this is another wonderful point you said and mentioned about that heritage protection. Retrofitting is a good idea to move rather than going for a wholesome building kind of approach. So that is also a good point of movement you have given. Another point you have said that that heritage is important, and heritage is not getting that kind of priorities when it comes to the allocation of fund or allocation of DRR risk reduction priorities. So that is also important. And the damage assessment to especially focus that why not you start as a kind of a sectoral learning, sectoral programs for that. I don't know whether the Intech and other, like also, you gave many examples of one museum is doing very good, another museum is very, so how that cross-sectoral or cross-museum learning, that X is doing what and Y is doing what, whether this kind of arrangements are there in place, that where some summit or meet happens on a regular basis, annual summit on the museum, and sharing their experience with various disaster or maybe various other challenges. If not, that we can think of starting those kind of initiatives, which we have suggested. And role of two institutions. One is the media, and another is the role of academic institutions like universities and all. So I am taking these. There are many other points also, but these are the quick learning points which I can think is a go ahead from here, and the inputs which the very rich inputs you have given, and we got enlightened on this subject. And so I'm really thankful to both of you. And I'm saying that if you give the last punch word before you we ask Vivek to close his remarks, I can think of taking a last punchline from both of you. Yes, Divyaji, your punchline.
Okay, before the punchline, I also forgot to mention that because Rohit mentioned World Bank, and Santoji, you would know that for the first time, 2001 earthquake, heritage was also one of the sectors in the Gujarat earthquake in the World Bank report, and they borrowed mostly from the assessment that we did. And that's why I think the heritage got funding in Gujarat also. Subsequently, in several of the other disasters, this was not one of the sectors. And I think my punchline is that heritage is not about the past, it is about the future. And I think this is the conservation is only a process to bring the past into the future. So I think if we go with that, then I think the perception completely changes of heritage. We are not looking into the past, but we are really looking into the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rohit.
Well, I would say that let's not look at heritage as only something that we need to protect. Let's think of heritage as an asset that can contribute towards resilience and work towards that. So I think that's the important thing in my view.
Thank you very much. Most of the discussions which keeps happening in NIDM and also at the national level, the moment we talk about the structural resilience, people keep on giving examples that our heritage has survived so many earthquakes, so many days. So heritage has also, for civil engineers, they have to understand that how the beauty of the traditional this science, which people they erected this kind of a structure and still surviving after passage of so many years. So this could be a good learning for the civil engineers as well, that how it is not there much in the kind of I don't think Rohit, you bear me out in those who are getting trained at BTech degree in civil engineering, how much they are exposed to this kind of
in fact, Professor Kumar, I'm glad you raised this issue. I wanted to say it, but I thought it's we don't have enough time. We have a real issue with our education. I, as an architect, never learned about, of course, I learned when I did my heritage studies, but I never learned, I only learned about new materials, and the construction. So we have to really bring this in the education system for our architects, engineers as well.
Thank you very much. Vivek, over to you. So that you can finally say bye-bye to everyone, and my heartfelt thanks to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Dharendra is not here, but yeah, thank you very much. Vivek.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable remark. Now I would like to extend a formal vote of thanks. Today's webinar was full of knowledge and interesting things. It gave deep insights into the topics and also revealed some interesting facts. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Shri Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director, Sir, NIDM, for his valuable guidance. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Shri Professor Santosh Kumar Sir, Head DRR NIDM, for his support and guidance throughout the event. All esteemed delegates of the webinar for their presence and contribution to make this webinar a great success. I extend my gratitude to Shri Divya Gupta Sir, Principal Director, Architectural Heritage Division, INTEC, Shri Dr. Rohit Jigyasu Sir, Project Manager, ICC ROM Rome, and Shri Pankaj Dharendra Sir, Superintendent Archaeology and Museums, Government of Rajasthan, to take out time from their busy schedule to grace this event. I also extend my heartfelt thanks to the participants for being with us. Thanking everyone for coming, be cordial, humble. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. Thank you, sir. Olaf, thank you. Now we officially end the session here. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.